Well, hello and welcome to fallacy number 14. We're going to be discussing the straw man argument today. Straw man argument is a fun argument to discuss, and it's a fun one to actually create and use. It's simple. All you really need to do is listen to the argument that's coming towards you and think of a way to recast that argument, mischaracterize that argument, cast it in the worst possible light. So, the straw man is not a real man. A straw man is like a scarecrow. If you were to be in a boxing match, would you rather fight a strong, muscular boxer who's real, or would you rather just set up a man filled with straw and knock him down? It's a lot easier to knock down a straw man. So why don't we just take the strong argument and turn it into a weak argument and just knock it down? It's a very common ploy. It's probably happened to you, hasn't it? There must have been some times in your life when you were making a case for something and then someone said something like this. So what you're really saying is because you're so lazy, you would like to go get a smartphone. That way you wouldn't have to go get the actual dictionary and look up words. Your smartphone would have a dictionary on board. And because you're so lazy you can't get up and get the book yourself, that's why you want a smartphone? Is that what I'm saying? I'm not quite saying that. So let's explore this. There's a couple of examples in the book that we'll make mention of just briefly, and I'd like to just read the definition as we start. A straw man argument. Arguments that attempt to disprove an opponent's position by presenting it in an unfair, inaccurate light. So, unfair, inaccurate. Has this happened to you guys before? Of course it has. Can anyone think of an example of a time when something you said was mischaracterized or cast in a poor light?
Well, one time we were wanting to get a printer, and so we need a printer so we can print our papers for school and turn them in. And my brother's like, "Well, you just want to have the coolest gadgets, which is ironic since he needed the printer too." But
so your brother was offering a criticism of your desire to get a new printer.
Yes, he was restating it in a way that made it look like I was getting it just for status symbol.
Just for status symbol. Well, has anyone else had that criticism come to you? You're seeking something and you've been told you just want it because of X. Fashion, status, popularity. Seth, you were commenting earlier about how you'd like to have a smartphone. And I used that example at the beginning. And why is it that you would really want a smartphone?
So I can contact my friends.
No, but you don't need a smartphone to contact your friends.
No.
You could use a rotary dial-up to contact your friends.
That's true.
So why do you really want a smartphone? Isn't it that you want to just look cool?
No.
And isn't it that you want to impress your friends? I mean, how many of your friends have an iPhone in 8th grade? Not many.
That's true.
Yeah, so if you had an iPhone, you would kind of stand out, wouldn't you? Well, that's why you want the iPhone.
I would say that's a straw man.
That's a straw man argument. Yeah. Let's explore an argument and let's just try and create a straw man together. Let's say there's a discussion among friends that's turning into a debate about whether homeschooling or traditional schooling would be preferable. And so let's just take that argument. Grace, why don't you offer an argument for why homeschooling would be preferential?
I could say, well, you just want to homeschool because you want to do whatever you want to do all day, Because someone could say, it's great, you can work at your own pace, you can study what you want to study. Mm-hmm. And I could restate it saying you just want to study whatever you want.
Is that true that homeschoolers can just study whatever they want?
No.
No,
not really.
Okay.
I was homeschooled once, and there are homeschooling curriculum that you can choose that you have to follow.
You actually have to follow a curriculum if you're a homeschooler.
Yes, so you have to read certain books by certain weeks and do a certain amount of math lessons by a certain time.
Mm-hmm. How else might we cast homeschooling in a poor light?
We might say that it's simply a group of overprotective parents trying to keep their child in a bubble, unexposed to the world, and just trying to keep them away from civilization.
Yes, people are rather provincial, wouldn't you say? Not really engaged with the culture around them. In fact, they're probably escapist. Just people trying to escape and not deal with the real problems of the world. That sounds good to me. All right, that would be mischaracterizing homeschooling. How could we mischaracterize traditional schooling? Can you offer an argument, Ellen?
Well, you can take the same that their parents are just overprotective, trying to keep their kids in their little bubble and not expose them. But parents who have kids in public school or just any non-homeschool, they can say, well, I don't want my kid to be shy and not know about the world. I want them to be experienced and know how to deal with problems and how to deal with issues with other kids, which you wouldn't get homeschooling.
Yeah, so now let's say I'm an advocate of homeschooling and I want to offer a criticism of that view. How might we criticize that view and make it look silly?
You could say, well, you just don't feel like educating your child all day. You're just going to let the government do it for you and do a shoddy job, you know.
A government bureaucrat's going to educate your child for 7 hours a day.
Or you could say, you're just letting the government steal your child from you and, indoctrinate them.
Any other criticisms that we could offer? And now, how about you offered a criticism of folks who might choose public school, but what if folks are choosing a private school, maybe a private Christian school? How might you cast that in a poor light?
Well, you would say, well, you are just being protective of the child, not exposing them to the culture of today. You are trying to be, you are trying to educate them in your own religion, trying to keep them set in your ways and not letting them make decisions for themselves.
You're kind of prohibiting them from growing up as autonomous individuals, and you're just trying to force them to be carbon copies of yourself. So it's another kind of indoctrination and maybe even brainwashing. And it can also be an escape from the world, right? Going to a private religious school. So we have that escapism argument as well.
Or you could say, you're just trying to put your child in this elitist class, What you're really doing is setting your children in this group to be part of a special social circle. Yeah.
Excellent point. You hear that criticism a lot. Now, sometimes there can be a little bit of truth in some of these arguments that are straw man arguments, but normally they're exaggerated, right? Like you may have some parents who are thinking, the place where I live, I am concerned to protect my child, and choosing a private school may have that motive. I want some measure of protection because the schools around are just not considered to be very safe, and so there can be some truth to that, but when it's exaggerated, as if that's the only thing that's going on, and it's portrayed when the motive is portrayed such that it makes the parents look pretty silly, then we're getting into a straw man. It might not actually be the real argument that we have at hand. So you can probably imagine ways that you would counter some of these arguments by saying, well, wait a minute, that's not exactly what I'm thinking and what I'm believing. Let me give you the real argument and respond to that rather than this straw man that you are creating. How about some other areas of life? We've talked about schooling. How about something a little more dramatic like going to war or big moral issues? How about the war? How about the United States choosing to go to war in Afghanistan and Iraq? How might you criticize that decision?
Well, many critics claim that we went to war in Iraq for the oil and not to free the Iraqi and Kuwaitan people.
So really, America was not concerned about the democracy of the Iraqi nation, right? The freedom of the Iraqi people.
Well, what we very often hear is sort of a generalization about the United States in general. They'll say things like, you'll know if you'll notice, the United States is very concerned about the humanitarian relief efforts or in the democracies of various cultures, but usually when only in cases of countries or nations that might be able to then work with us, might be able to offer us something in return. You don't usually see the United States rushing into all of the different African nations and helping them settle all of their village disputes and their governmental disputes and some of those that part of the world. And why is that? Why don't we commit our troops to that part of the world? I mean, there's certainly lives lost and democracies not founded and all sorts of things. Why is it that we focus in oil-rich countries or in countries that might serve as launch pads for different air bases across the world? Why not Africa? Why don't we get more involved there? And so they sort of generalize and in that way cast a negative light on what might be a legitimate argument about our national safety and all sorts of things, in addition to the plight of the people in those countries as well.
Which reminds me that sometimes arguments can be complex. Sometimes there can be multiple reasons for why you want something or why a policy is being pursued. And what you're pointing out is that in an issue like going to war, there's likely to be several issues going on, several reasons why we might do this. And when someone only lists out one of those reasons and then puts that in the worst possible light, there's a kind of generalizing that's going on as well. We're kind of reducing or simplifying an argument in a way that's not accurate or helpful. So it could be oil. Someone might say we're just going to war for the oil. What might be some other ways of casting that argument in the worst possible light? The United States went to war because
we noticed that President Bush came from the southwestern part of the country, and some people might say, you're just going to war because President Bush wants to. He's a ruffian from the range, and he wants to get into that battle.
He loves a shootout. He's a cowboy who would love to have another shootout.
Yeah.
Sure. Or maybe
he's finishing his father's work. Perhaps. The George Bush Sr. Wasn't able to, completely put a period at the end of the first Iraq War. So George Bush Jr. was looking for an opportunity to get in there and kind of settle things once and for all, and knock that Saddam Hussein and
He is securing his family's legacy and dynasty.
Absolutely.
That's really what he wants to do. He wants to go down in history as someone who stood up to the bad guys around the world and finished the job his father began.
Right.
The Bushes just could not allow a job like that to go undone. Okay, now we're starting to impute motives to people that might not be there, and that's a straw man argument. And that's happened to all of us, hasn't it? When the argument comes at you and you're thinking, wait a minute, did I say that? You think that's why I want to do this?
And in this case, there's enough truth. There's, we do know that George Bush Sr. was the president at the time when the first Gulf War was started. So that is true, and that the job was left undone, and that at a certain point in history, then Saddam Hussein was rearing his ugly head once again, and threatening people and the communities around him and that sort of thing. So there's enough truth there to make it seemed plausible, like that could be the reason why. And then, of course, his son being this cavalier cowboy kind of thing, looking for a fight, what have you. But there's no talk of Al Qaeda with, in Afghanistan, and there's, there's different tyrants in the Middle East. I mean, they've left out all of the, other important points of argument. They've just focused on enough of the truth to make it sound plausible and still cast it in a negative light.
I think some of the most convincing lies and the best lies are the ones that are mostly true, and that's what makes this fallacy so successful, is that it creates a false truth.
Now, Grace, you were talking about how your older sister, who's on the debate club at college, is engaged in kind of creating straw men as part of the philosophy of debate. Talk about that.
A lot of times this style of debate she does is that a lot of the arguments are rhetoric based, not logic based, and so the main goal of it is just to make your opponent look bad. They have this saying, when life gives you lemons, make nuclear war. Take their argument, blow it up, turn it into something huge, and then make them look bad. So a lot of times it's used in debating circles as a method of making opponents look bad and winning around.
And Julie, you were on a debate team as well. So is that in fact what you did when you were on the debate team?
Sadly, I'm almost ashamed to say that when I my husband and I moved to a different different state. We moved mid-year, and they were looking for someone to head up their debate club at this school. And we just hadn't had the time that the other schools had had. This is me giving a good excuse for abusing logic here. We hadn't had the time as other schools had had to really thoroughly prepare for the debate season. And we just didn't have time to master all of the arguments and craft all of the arguments the way that we would have really wanted to if we had had the time. So we didn't want to miss the season, though. So what I did was we took this very logic book, actually, and gave the kids a crash course in how to find fallacies created by other people and then in many cases use straw man arguments. One of the tricks with debating is that you can either win an argument, or you can get points, rather, in debating by crafting an argument that isn't refuted, or by poking a hole in an argument that someone else creates. And if they can't get that point back, then you get to keep that point. So again, we weren't really able to craft a lot of our own arguments, so we spent our time poking holes in the arguments of others, and then very often we crafted straw man fallacies. We would take their argument, oversimplify it, create that false truth that Grace was talking about, and skew things just enough that we would be able to take their point away from them, and they were sort of left in a lurch because they weren't really sure how to respond to a straw man fallacy. We were saying just enough truth that it sounded like what they were saying, but then we were misconstruing it just enough that we got the point. We ended up doing very, very well that debate season, but the overseers of the debate team, all the debate teams told us that in the future we were not going to be allowed to come into arguments just poking holes and refuting. We were going to have to craft some of our own arguments in the future. So that was a very short-lived success strategy. But yeah, it can be done, and it's not, we weren't actually crafting anything positive. We were winning by asserting the negative of something, which we weren't really winning anything at all.
So, when in doubt, when you're hearing an argument coming at you, it sounds pretty good, just recast it and say something like, so what you're really saying is, and then just, mischaracterize it. Now, let's just talk about a couple more examples, and then we should close. What about, Grace, you'd mentioned your sister committed a fallacy when she was thinking about skipping school one day. Tell us about that.
Well, I'm Ellen.
Oh, sorry. And you're Grace? That's right. Okay.
Yeah, once one of our friends were getting married the next day, and it was a school day. And she's like, Dad, I really want to go support my friends, see them on their big day, excuse me, and get married. And I came over, very kindly, little sister. It's like, well, you just want to sleep in and miss school because you don't like the class you're taking, and you just want to party all day long. And obviously that would have been a bonus, but she really did want to see her friends on their big day. So that was definitely a straw man.
And how did she respond? Did she point that out to you?
Yes.
Did she say straw man fallacy?
No. She was way too nerdy looking.
All right. Now how about the abortion debate? This is a more emotional issue, and of course it's quite well known. But do we see straw man arguments in this debate?
Well, yes. Often people will portray in obviously negative light the views of the opponent in this debate. They'll almost categorize them in a false category. For instance, if there is a pro-life activist, they might say, the pro-choice activists might say, well, you're just against the rights of women. You don't believe women should have any rights. Or the pro-life might say, well, you just don't care about life. You just don't really care about these babies. You care more about your own selfish choice and your own well-being than of the well-being of other human beings. So there can be fallacies there.
Right. Anyone want to add to that? I think that's well summarized. And of course that just creates more heat than light, doesn't it, in the debate? So it's important, to argue fair, to be a gentleman or gentlewoman in a debate. We probably should try to assume the best of our opponents, and avoid mischaracterizing their positions. But when we feel like our position is being mischaracterized, we need to set the record straight.
And I think when we create this fallacy, we're prohibiting the group from arriving at that truth, which is the purpose of debate, by oversimplifying, neglecting the details, the nuances, and in the end, we're not going to get a good result.
Mm-hmm.
It's almost as if it's almost a fallback, it seems, when someone really doesn't have any refutation or criticism to give of an argument. You can tell it's a way of trying to mask someone's transparency or see-throughness by betraying their opponent in a negative light. You can tell that that person really doesn't have much logic.
Yeah, they don't have a great comeback, but it's interesting. It is a kind of debater's trick, as Julie was pointing out. It's a great trick to use in debate. You're struggling with how to respond to this pretty good argument, so let's just poke a hole in it by making it into a straw man. So as Grace was saying, we need to pursue truth together, and as we're seeking truth, even in argument and debate and discussion, we want to assume that our opponent can actually help us in this process, and it's not going to be helpful if we're casting people's points of view in a negative light. So we want to avoid that, but we also want to defend against it when it happens. So we'll let that be our summary of the fallacy of the straw man argument. Look for it; you'll see it commonly. We'll be back next time for fallacy number 15, which I believe is going to be circular arguments or begging the question. We'll see you for that one.